大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。今天我们要说的这个人，他曾经是一个差点当牧师的男人。他在海上漂泊了5年，他亲眼看见这个世界最奇妙的角落，然后他带着满满的疑问回到英国，一躲就是20年。20年后的一本书，让整个世界都震动了。他叫做查尔斯达尔文，演化论的创立者。今天我们一起来认识这位改变人类思维的大师。1809年2月12日，达尔文出生在英格兰的什罗普郡。他的家庭非常有名望，父亲罗伯特·达尔文是一位有钱的医生，母亲是著名陶瓷大王约书亚·维吉伍德的女儿。达尔文从小就家境优渥，衣食无缺，但是他的童年并不全是快乐的，因为他8岁就失去了母亲。小达尔文从小就喜欢在户外乱跑，他收集甲虫，他观察鸟类，他钓鱼，他在田野里漫步。他的父亲看着这个儿子，摇着头说了一句话，大意是说你这样整天玩耍，对你自己和家族都是一种羞耻。但达尔文根本不把这些话放在心上，他的心已经飞向了大自然。16岁那年，父亲把达尔文送去爱丁堡大学念医学，这是家族的期待。结果达尔文一看到手术室里的血，就吓到了，他完全无法忍受。手术的场面让他夜不成眠。他在爱丁堡待了2年，几乎没怎么认真念医学，反而跑去跟随一位叫做罗伯特·格兰特的学者，研究海洋无脊椎动物。父亲知道之后非常失望，于是改变计划，把达尔文送去剑桥大学，希望他念神学，将来当一个体面的英国国教牧师。达尔文就这样去了剑桥，在那里他认识了一位植物学教授约翰·韩斯罗。韩斯罗慧眼识英雄，他发现这个学生虽然不太念书，但是对自然的观察力非同寻常。他收达尔文为门生，带着他去野外采集标本，2人成了忘年之交。达尔文在剑桥念了3年，1831年拿到学位。当时他的打算是毕业后去海外旅行1圈，再回英国当牧师。但是命运在这一年给了他一个惊喜，那是1831年8月的某一天，达尔文收到了韩斯罗寄来的一封信，信上说英国皇家海军有一艘船叫做小猎犬号，即将出发前往南美洲进行海岸测量任务。船长罗伯特·费兹罗伊正在寻找一位绅士，可以在漫长的航行中陪伴他，顺便做一些自然史的观察。韩斯罗认为达尔文非常适合。达尔文看到这封信，心跳加速，这不就是他梦寐以求的冒险吗？他立刻答应了，但是父亲不同意。父亲觉得这趟旅行是在浪费时间，是不务正业。好在达尔文的舅舅约书亚·维吉伍德2世出面说服，父亲才终于点头，甚至慷慨解囊资助这趟旅程。1831年12月27日，小猎犬号从普利茅斯港口出发，船上的达尔文当时只有22岁，满脑子都是兴奋。但是他没想到的是，这一走就是将近5年。他也没想到的是，他晕船晕得非常厉害，几乎整个航程他都在吐。在甲板上摇摇晃晃的达尔文，对着茫茫大海，心里大概在想这到底是什么体验。不过晕船并没有打倒他，每次靠岸，达尔文就迫不及待地跳上岸，开始他的探索之旅。第一站是佛得角群岛，他在那里的火山岩壁上发现了一条白色的带状地层，里面竟然有贝壳化石，这说明原本在海底的地层曾经被抬升到高处。这个发现让达尔文兴奋不已，他开始认真思考地球的变化。接着小猎犬号来到了南美洲的巴西，达尔文第一次见到了热带雨林，那种生命力让他震撼。他后来形容说，那种感觉就像脑子里面充满了喜悦的混乱。但是他也在巴西亲眼目睹了奴隶制度的残忍，那种对人的压迫让他心里很不舒服。达尔文终生都是一个反对奴隶制度的人，这次巴西之行让他的反奴隶立场更加坚定。在南美洲的几年里，达尔文爬山，深入丛林，还亲身经历了一场大地震。 在智利的瓦尔迪维亚，他正躺在树林里休息，地面突然开始剧烈摇动，整个城镇几乎被摧毁。达尔文看着这场浩劫，脑子里飞速地想，地震能在瞬间把海底抬升出海面，那么地球的地貌一直都在缓慢而巨大的改变之中。这种思维方式后来也影响了他看待生命演化的角度。在南美洲的巴塔哥尼亚，达尔文挖出了一批巨大的哺乳动物化石，这些动物已经灭绝了，但是它们的身体构造跟现代生活在同一片土地上的动物非常相似，只是体型大了很多。达尔文开始思考，为什么已灭绝的动物和现代动物之间会有这样明显的相似性，然后来到了改变一切的地方——加拉巴哥群岛。1835年9月，小猎犬号抵达这个位于太平洋的火山群岛。达尔文在这里待了5个星期。他注意到一件很奇妙的事情，这个群岛上的生物跟南美洲大陆的生物长得很像，但又不完全一样，而且同样是雀鸟，在不同的岛屿上，它们的喙的形状竟然都不一样，有的喙又长又细，适合啄取仙人掌的花蜜，有的喙又厚又短，适合咬碎坚硬的种子。达尔文把这些雀鸟的标本全部带走，但当时他还没有完全想清楚这代表什么意思。1836年10月2日，小猎犬号终于回到了英国的法尔茅斯港。达尔文带回了数以千计的标本，还有密密麻麻的笔记本。他在船上就已经出名了，因为他的观察记录在英国被朋友整理出版，反应热烈，大家都想见见这位年轻的自然学者。但是达尔文没有急着出来面对公众，他悄悄地开始整理自己的想法。回国之后不久，达尔文把那些加拉巴哥的雀鸟标本交给了鸟类学家约翰·古尔德。古尔德一看，吓了一跳，他告诉达尔文，这些根本不是几种不同类的鸟，而是同一个雀鸟家族的不同种类，只是因为生活在不同岛屿上，为了适应不同的环境，喙的形状才演化的各不相同。这句话就像一道闪电打进了达尔文的脑子。1837年，达尔文开始在笔记本里悄悄记录他的演化思想。1838年，他读到了经济学家马尔萨斯的一本书，书的内容是关于人口增长和资源竞争的理论。马尔萨斯认为，生物繁殖的速度远远超过食物增长的速度，所以必然会有大量个体死亡。达尔文读到这里突然灵光一闪，他想到，在这种激烈的竞争中，拥有有利特征的个体就能更好的存活和繁殖，把这些有利特征传给下一代，而拥有不利特征的个体就会被淘汰。久而久之，这个物种就会逐渐改变。这就是物竞天择的核心思想。达尔文把这个想法写下来了，但是他没有发表。他继续搜集更多的证据，他做实验，他研究农夫培育家禽的方法，他向全世界的科学家和农夫写信询问。他把这件事藏在心里20年。为什么藏了20年？因为他知道这个理论一旦公开，会引发多大的风暴。演化论意味着人类不是上帝特别创造的，意味着人类和猿猴有共同的祖先。这在一个充满宗教信仰的社会里是非常激进的思想。1839年，达尔文娶了表妹艾玛为吉伍德为妻。艾玛是一个虔诚的基督徒，她知道达尔文的理论，她担心这个理论会让达尔文在上帝面前失去救赎，但她依然深爱着这个丈夫。两人一起搬到了伦敦郊外的唐宫庄园，他们在那里生了10个孩子，有3个夭折。达尔文非常疼爱孩子，尤其是长女安妮。安妮在10岁的时候因病去世，这件事对达尔文的打击非常大。很多学者认为，安妮的死让达尔文对宗教的信仰又更加动摇了。在唐宫庄园的那些年，达尔文的健康状况一直很差，他经常头痛、心悸、恶心呕吐、皮肤起疹子，各种说不清楚的毛病，医生一直找不到确切的原因。后代的研究者有各种猜测，有人认为他在南美洲感染了查加斯病，有人认为是心理压力造成的身心症， 总之他就是一直在病中，但他仍然坚持工作。他在病榻上写作，他在花园里做实验，他研究藤壶研究了8年，把全世界的藤壶物种几乎都搞清楚了，只因他觉得自己要先成为一个严谨的科学家，再来发表那个改变世界的理论。时间来到了1858年，一封来自东南亚的信打破了达尔文的平静。寄信的人叫做阿尔弗雷德·罗素华莱士，他在信里写了一个关于生物演化的理论。达尔文一看，整个人呆住了，因为这个理论跟他自己的理论几乎一模一样。20年的心血，差点就被人抢先发表了。达尔文的朋友们赶紧帮他安排，让达尔文和华莱士同时在科学学会上发表各自的论文，一起共享这个发现的荣耀。之后达尔文终于决定不能再拖了，他把自己多年积累的材料整理成书，用了13个月的时间，完成了那本改变世界的著作，就是《物种起源》。1859年11月24日出版，第一版只印了1250本，结果当天就卖光了。这本书的全名非常长，中文可以翻译成依靠自然选择的物种起源，也就是在生存竞争中优良种族的保存。书里用了大量的事实和论证，向世界说明了生命是如何从共同的祖先，透过自然选择的机制，缓慢地演化成今天这么多样的形态。物种起源出版之后，就像一颗炸弹扔进了维多利亚时代的英国社会。宗教人士愤怒了，他们认为达尔文是在否定上帝创造万物的神圣教义。1860年，在牛津大学举行了一场著名的大辩论，牛津主教威尔伯福斯代表宗教一方，达尔文的好友托马斯赫胥黎代表科学一方。据说主教在辩论中讽刺地问赫胥黎，请问你是从猿猴那一边的祖先，还是从你祖母那一边继承了猿猴的血统？赫胥黎毫不示弱地回答，如果要我在猿猴和那种明明有才能却用来嘲弄科学的人之间选一个祖先，我宁愿选猿猴。这场辩论成了科学史上最戏剧性的时刻之一。达尔文自己没有出席那场辩论，他在家里静静地继续他的研究。他在之后的岁月里继续出版了很多重要的著作，包括研究人类起源的人类的由来，研究动植物表情的论著，以及各种研究植物的书籍。他研究藤本植物，研究食虫植物，研究兰花，研究蚯蚓。他对蚯蚓的研究尤其令人感动。晚年的他花了整整40年观察蚯蚓，最后一本出版的书就是关于蚯蚓的研究。他认为蚯蚓翻土对农业有不可估量的重要性。这件事完全可以看出达尔文的性格，他就是一个对任何生命都充满好奇的人，在微小的生物也不例外。1882年4月19日，达尔文在唐宫庄园平静地去世，享年73岁。英国政府给了他国葬的殊荣，他被安葬在伦敦西敏寺，就在另一位伟大科学家艾萨克·牛顿的旁边。达尔文留给我们的遗产是什么？演化论今天已经成为整个生物学的基础，就像物理学有牛顿定律一样，生物学有演化论，没有演化论就没有现代基因学，没有现代医学对疾病的理解，没有对病毒和细菌如何变异的认识。今天我们研究癌症的演化，研究抗药性的形成，研究生态系统的变迁，全都建立在达尔文的理论基础之上。有一句话我很喜欢，达尔文自己说的，大意是说无知往往比知识更能带来自信。那些对科学知甚少的人，往往斩钉截铁地说某事不可能，而认真研究科学的人，反而懂得谦逊和不确定。这句话放在今天的世界依然适用。达尔文的一生告诉我们什么？他告诉我们，伟大的发现往往需要时间积累。他花了20年才准备好说出那个改变世界的理论。他告诉我们，在病痛和质疑声中也可以坚持做科学。他告诉我们，真正的好奇心是没有边界的。从加拉巴哥的雀鸟到花园里的蚯蚓，都值得我们认真的去观察和思考。亲爱的朋友们，下次你看到一只鸟停在树枝上，或者挖土的时候看到一条蚯蚓， 不妨想一想达尔文，想一想地球上这场已经持续了几十亿年的生命演化大戏。我们每一个人都是这场大戏的一部分。谢谢你今天陪我一起沉思，我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today we are talking about a man who nearly became a clergyman. He spent 5 years drifting across the seas. He witnessed the most extraordinary corners of our world. Then he returned to England carrying a mind full of questions. He hid those questions for 20 years. And 20 years later, a single book shook the entire world. His name was Charles Darwin, the father of evolutionary theory. Today, let us get to know this master who transformed the way humanity thinks about life itself. On February 12, 1809, Darwin was born in Shrewsbury, England. His family was highly distinguished. His father, Robert Darwin, was a wealthy physician. His mother was the daughter of the famous pottery industrialist Josiah Wedgwood. Darwin grew up in comfort and privilege. But his childhood was not without sorrow. He lost his mother when he was only 8 years old. From a young age, Darwin loved wandering outdoors. He collected beetles. He watched birds. He went fishing. He roamed through fields and meadows. His father watched this son of his and shook his head. He reportedly told young Charles that all this playing and wandering was a disgrace to himself and the whole family. But Darwin paid little attention to those words. His heart had already flown out into the natural world. At the age of 16, his father sent him to the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. This was the family expectation. But the moment Darwin stepped into an operating room and saw blood, he froze. He simply could not bear it. The sight of surgery haunted him at night. He stayed in Edinburgh for 2 years and barely studied medicine at all. Instead, he followed a scholar named Robert Edmund Grant, studying marine invertebrates. His father was deeply disappointed. So he changed the plan and sent Darwin to Cambridge University, hoping he would study theology and become a respectable Anglican clergyman. And so Darwin went to Cambridge. There he met a botany professor named John Stevens Henslow. Henslow had a sharp eye for talent. He noticed that this student, though not particularly diligent with his coursework, had an extraordinary gift for observing the natural world. Henslow took Darwin under his wing. He brought Darwin along on field trips to collect specimens. The two became close friends despite the gap in their ages. Darwin spent 3 years at Cambridge and graduated in 1831. His plan at the time was to travel briefly abroad and then return to England to become a clergyman. But fate had a very different surprise waiting for him that year. In August of 1831, Darwin received a letter from Henslow. The letter explained that the Royal Navy had a ship called HMS Beagle. It was about to depart for South America on a mission to survey coastlines. The captain, Robert Fitzroy, was looking for a gentleman companion for the long voyage. Someone who could also make natural history observations along the way. Henslow thought Darwin was the perfect candidate. Darwin read the letter and his heart leapt. Was this not the adventure he had always dreamed of? He immediately said yes. But his father refused. His father thought the voyage was a waste of time and irresponsible. Fortunately, Darwin's uncle Josiah Wedgwood too stepped in to persuade the father. Finally, the elder Darwin relented and even generously funded the trip. On December 27, 1831, HMS Beagle departed from Plymouth. Darwin was only 22 years old. His mind was buzzing with excitement. What he did not anticipate was that this journey would last nearly 5 years. What he also did not anticipate was how terribly seasick he would be. He was sick for almost the entire voyage. Darwin swayed on the deck above a vast and heaving ocean, probably wondering what on earth he had gotten himself into. But seasickness did not defeat him. Every time the ship docked, Darwin leapt ashore and threw himself into exploration. The first stop was the Cape Verde Islands. In the volcanic rock cliffs there, he found a white band of sediment embedded with seashells. This suggested that the seafloor had once been lifted high above the ocean. Darwin was thrilled by this discovery. He began thinking seriously about how the Earth itself was constantly changing. Then the Beagle arrived at Brazil in South America. Darwin saw a tropical rainforest for the first time. The sheer force of life there overwhelmed him. He later described the feeling as a kind of joyful chaos filling his brain. But he also witnessed the brutal reality of the slave trade in Brazil. The cruelty of one human being owning another filled him with deep unease. Darwin was opposed to slavery for his entire life. This time in Brazil only strengthened that conviction. During his years exploring South America, Darwin climbed mountains, pushed deep into jungles, and personally lived through a massive earthquake. In Valdivia, Chile, he was resting on the ground in a forest when the earth began to shake violently. The nearby town was nearly destroyed. As Darwin surveyed the wreckage, his mind raced. An earthquake could raise the seafloor above the waterline in an instant, which meant the surface of the earth had been slowly and profoundly changing for an almost unimaginable span of time. This way of thinking about gradual change would later shape how he understood the evolution of life itself. In Patagonia, Darwin dug up the fossils of enormous mammals that had long gone extinct. Yet their body structures were remarkably similar to animals still living in the same region today, just vastly larger. Darwin kept asking himself, why would extinct animals resemble modern ones so closely if each species had been separately created? And then came the place that changed everything: the Galapagos Islands. In September of 1835, HMS Beagle arrived at this volcanic archipelago in the Pacific Ocean. Darwin spent 5 weeks there. He noticed something deeply puzzling. The creatures on these islands resembled the animals of mainland South America, but they were not quite the same. And among the finches, different islands had birds with noticeably different beak shapes. Some beaks were long and thin, perfect for probing cactus flowers. Others were thick and short, built for cracking hard seeds. Darwin packed up all the bird specimens and took them with him. But at that moment, he had not yet fully worked out what they meant. On October 2, 1836, HMS Beagle finally returned to Falmouth, England. Darwin brought back thousands of specimens and notebooks filled with observations. He had already become famous while he was still at sea. His friend had published his field notes in England, and the response was enthusiastic. Everyone wanted to meet this young naturalist. But Darwin did not rush to meet the public. He quietly began organizing his thoughts. Shortly after returning home, Darwin handed those Galapagos finch specimens to the ornithologist John Gould. Gould examined them and was astonished. He told Darwin that these birds were not from several different families. They all belonged to the same family of finches. They had simply evolved different beak shapes on different islands in response to different food sources and environments. That single sentence struck Darwin like a bolt of lightning. In 1837, Darwin began quietly recording his evolutionary ideas in private notebooks. In 1838, he read a book by the economist Thomas Malthus on population growth and resource competition. Malthus argued that living things reproduce far faster than food supplies can grow. So large numbers of individuals must inevitably perish in the competition for resources. Darwin read this and suddenly everything clicked. In that fierce competition, individuals with favorable traits would be more likely to survive and reproduce. They would pass those traits to their offspring. Individuals with unfavorable traits would be eliminated. Over long stretches of time, a species would gradually transform. This was the core of natural selection. Darwin wrote it all down. But he did not publish it. He continued gathering evidence. He ran experiments. He studied the methods farmers used to breed livestock and pigeons. He wrote letters to scientists and farmers around the world asking detailed questions. He kept this secret for 20 years. Why 20 years? Because he knew what kind of storm this theory would unleash. Evolution meant that humans were not specially created by God. It meant humans and apes shared a common ancestor. In a society deeply shaped by religious faith, this was a radical and dangerous idea. In 1839, Darwin married his cousin Emma Wedgwood. Emma was a devout Christian. She knew about Darwin's theory. She worried that it would cost him his soul in the eyes of God. But she loved him deeply regardless. Together they moved to Down House in the English countryside. They had 10 children together. 3 died in childhood. Darwin adored his children. He was especially devoted to his eldest daughter Annie. When Annie died of illness at the age of 10, Darwin was devastated. Many scholars believe that Annie's death further weakened whatever religious faith Darwin still held. During those years at Down House, Darwin's health was consistently poor. He suffered from headaches, heart palpitations, nausea, skin rashes, and a whole range of ailments that puzzled his doctors. Later scholars have proposed various theories, including the possibility that he had contracted Chagas disease in South America, or that his symptoms were psychosomatic from the enormous mental pressure he carried. Whatever the cause, he remained ill for most of his adult life. But he kept working through it all. He wrote at his desk while unwell. He conducted experiments in his garden. He spent 8 entire years studying barnacles, cataloging nearly every species in the world. He did this because he wanted to establish himself as a rigorous and credible scientist before he dared to publish the theory that would change everything. Then in 1858, a letter from Southeast Asia shattered Darwin's calm. The sender was Alfred Russel Wallace. In the letter, Wallace described a theory of biological evolution. Darwin read it and went pale. The theory was almost identical to his own. 20 years of careful private work had nearly been scooped. Darwin's friends quickly arranged for both Darwin and Wallace to present their ideas jointly at a scientific society meeting. Together they shared the credit for the discovery. After that, Darwin knew he could wait no longer. He gathered all his years of accumulated material and began writing. It took him 13 months. The result was the book that changed the world. It was titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. It was published on November 24, 1859. The first edition had only 1,250 copies printed. They sold out on the day of publication. The book used mountains of evidence and carefully reasoned arguments to show how life on Earth had diversified from common ancestors through the gradual mechanism of natural selection. When On the Origin of Species appeared, it was like a bomb going off in Victorian England. Religious leaders were furious. They felt Darwin was attacking the sacred doctrine that God had created all living things. In 1860, a famous debate took place at Oxford University. The Bishop of Oxford, Samuel Wilberforce, represented the religious side. Darwin's close friend Thomas Henry Huxley represented science. According to accounts of that debate, the bishop mockingly asked Huxley whether it was through his grandfather or his grandmother that he claimed descent from an ape. Huxley did not flinch. He replied that if forced to choose between having an ape as an ancestor or having a man who used his talents to ridicule science, he would prefer the ape. That exchange became one of the most dramatic moments in the history of science. Darwin himself was not at that debate. He was at home, quietly continuing his research. In the years that followed, he published many more important works. These included a study of human origins called The Descent of Man, a study of emotional expression in humans and animals, and numerous books on plant biology. He studied climbing plants. He studied carnivorous plants. He studied orchids. He studied earthworms. His research on earthworms is particularly touching. In his later years he spent 40 years observing them. His very last published book was about earthworm behavior. He believed that earthworms and their soil-turning activity were of immeasurable importance to agriculture. This tells you everything about Darwin the man. He was endlessly curious about every living creature, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. On April 19, 1882, Darwin passed away peacefully at Down House. He was 73 years old. The British government honored him with a state funeral. He was buried in Westminster Abbey in London, right beside another towering figure in the history of science, Isaac Newton. What is the legacy Darwin left us? Evolutionary theory is today the foundation of all of biology. Just as physics rests on Newtonian mechanics, biology rests on evolution. Without evolution there is no modern genetics. No modern understanding of how diseases work. No way to understand how viruses and bacteria mutate and adapt. Today we study how cancers evolve within a single patient. We study how antibiotic resistance emerges in bacteria. We study how ecosystems shift over time. All of it is built on the foundation Darwin laid. Darwin once wrote something along the lines of ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. Those who know little about science are often the ones most certain that something is impossible, while those who have genuinely studied it learn the value of humility and uncertainty. Those words feel just as relevant today as when he first wrote them. What does Darwin's life tell us? It tells us that great discoveries often require long and patient accumulation. He spent 20 years preparing to say something that changed the world. It tells us that you can keep doing science even through illness and relentless criticism. It tells us that genuine curiosity has no boundaries. From the finches of the Galapagos Islands to the earthworms in a garden, everything deserves careful observation and serious thought. My dear friends, the next time you see a bird perched on a branch, or spot an earthworm while digging in the soil, think of Darwin for a moment. Think of this grand drama of life that has been playing out on Earth for billions of years. Each one of us is part of that story. Thank you for thinking deeply with me today. See you next time.